Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ryan Brumfield. I'm the Innovation and Data Branch Manager with the Integrated Mobility Division at NCDOT. Today's webinar features a great lineup of speakers discussing recent bike and pedestrian trends in North Carolina, as well as new planning data resources and emerging bike and pedestrian technologies. This is the second webinar in our new innovations webinar series called Another Way to Get From Here to There. For those of you joining us for the first time, I wanted to provide a quick background about our division. NCDOT recently formed the Integrated Mobility Division by combining the former Public Transportation and Bike and Pedestrian divisions. We now have a much broader focus to provide equitable multimodal access to opportunities and services for all North Carolina residents. In addition to our traditional public transit and bike and ped programs, our division's new focus areas include understanding emerging mobility trends, being an innovation leader in terms of piloting and deploying new mobility concepts, and providing strategic direction to NCDOT as we plan for a future with new mobility options and technologies. Our division has also, we also have an expanded focus on data analytics and data analysis, so the department can better understand mobility trends and identify gaps in multimodal access, which our division will have a leading role to help address. We also plan to be much more engaged in local and statewide transportation planning activities to ensure all modes are adequately considered and integrated in the planning process. So for our NPO and RPO guests today, if you haven't already, you should be hearing from our staff more often in the future as we get better engaged in your processes. This webinar series highlights some of the key initiatives our new division is working on, including today's topic, which relates closely to our division's expanded focus on data analysis and emerging technologies, particularly related to bike and pedestrians. So just a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover before turning it over to my colleague, John Vine Hodge, who's going to moderate today's session. Because we have such a large audience this morning, we have muted all attendees. If you have questions during the presentation, please add them to the Q&A box, or I believe it's the Q&A box or the chat box if that's what you see, but make sure you just type your questions in and we'll be sure to address them during the presentations. We plan to have a break for questions between each presentation and then additional time at the end for Q&A. Following today's webinar, you will receive a survey, and we would really appreciate if you take the time to provide feedback. We want these events to be most beneficial for you, so we welcome your input, suggestions, and ideas for future sessions. We've also established a website for this webinar series where you can go to access presentations, recordings, and other materials. Our recording for the last presentation on October 21st is available online there. And you can see the slide deck from that session as well. But we definitely hope that you'll take a look at the presentations that are up there. And we also, like I said, hope that you'll respond to the survey and give us any of your ideas for innovative topics to cover in future sessions. So regarding the website, Blair, if you don't mind sharing a link to that in the chat box so everyone has the link and can access the website. And I think with that, that's all the housekeeping items. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, John Vine Hodge, who will introduce our speakers and moderate today's session.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Hello, my name is John Vine Hodge, and I'm also with the Integrated Mobility Division. I'm the Deputy Director of Planning and Programming. We had as you guys may have saw the webinars last week or a few weeks ago, talking a little bit about our merger, but we have, merged public transportation and bike ped, and we have the bike ped planners and former mobility development specialists within our group that's coordinating a lot of the planning activities in the various regions of the state, and also working with the transit systems on some of their programs as well. So that's just a little introduction to me and kind of my group. And I'll get moving with the webinar series. So Just the first here, we're able to get where you have AICP credits for this. This is a little more information on something that you may need for that. But this will be on the slides that will be available afterwards too. So. This is our second webinar, as Brian was mentioning. This is the middle one there. The first one that we had back on the 21st is still, there's the recording available on our website, so you can go listen to that. That went very well. This is the second one that's just looking at a lot of the data that's available, some of the data sources that we have access to and what that data is showing. December 15th, our some more policy program webinar. And then beginning next year, we'll have two excellent webinars coming up. We set up these dates here recently, and we actually had to adjust the one for the where we did have the Charlotte Gateway Station on the January 5th. We changed that, moved it to February, and we also moved the S line up, but bumped that date down to January 26th. So you should get more information about this. This will be on the website too, but these are two of our more interesting webinars coming across at the beginning of the year. So. But again, we're going to focus on this one today. I just have a couple slides here before we get into the presenters. Just wanted to kind of give a little more of a framework on things, kind of a little background of what we're seeing nationally. You kind of build into kind of what the presenters are going to be discussing. So, you may have seen this first little chart graph here. This is from East Coast Greenway, and this is back. They're looking in March of 2019 and March of 2020. And really, we were all hearing a lot of this information, but this was some data that they actually took on the Greenway, on their locations of the East Coast Greenway at various states. And you can see a substantial increase in usage that was observed at the beginning of when people were kind of not going to work, staying home, and looking for ways to be active, including there near to us in Richmond on their trail, 65% increase. This other bar chart on the side, this is B-Cycle, which is a bike sharing system in various jurisdictions in the country. And this is over data they looked at in 2019 and some in 2020, various months. And they were seeing substantial increase in bike sharing that was occurring in these locations, as you can see there. And a lot of this was driven by e-bikes being introduced into their systems and the popularity of those. So, just a little more information that you kind of see data-wise that was going on nationally. What we are hearing though too is, so a lot of, I know I was hearing a lot of information about usage out there, and I was seeing it out there, people being out on the road more, biking and walking, and you would see it in articles that were being published. So this one first talking about the Charlotte area back in April, and then immediately kind of when people were staying at home and having to get outside, or how they felt more comfortable getting around. You're seeing them out there. And so they had something in the Charlotte paper about that, or Charlotte News. And then moving on to May, this cycling explosion has kind of what we're defining our webinar today, but you saw many articles about that as well. So we're seeing it here and around the country. In June, People for Bikes, they do weekly surveys, and this was one survey that they captured. They were seeing 9% of adults say they go to bike for the very first time, which is very interesting, and that they would continue that. A large number would continue that after they were able to get about and more, which is very encouraging through this situation. Perhaps people are getting on the bikes for the first time, and that will be part of their lifestyle moving forward. So. And then kind of going on to June, kind of moving on through the months, but we have bicycles at LA Times. Bicycles enjoyed a boom during the pandemic, but will it last as car traffic resumes? So that's been a question for a while. And I think some of the data that our presenters will have will kind of get into that some, but it was, seeing this peak that was happening, but as things maybe get back to normal, but we're not sure when that may be now. So what will happen? Will people still be biking around? Maybe they their lifestyle will change a little bit. How will they be moving forward in their commute or their activities? So that's something that's going to be looked at too. So we've seen places, kind of respond to having people wanting more spaces to bike and walk, wanting more opportunities for that. And these last two kind of bullets get at that. You've seen this one's just in Durham, just like a week or two ago, Durham, North Carolina, and they had a policy to open several streets, 6 or 7 residential streets, to these shared space where encouraging encouraging biking, walking, and those types of activities. So Charlotte and Raleigh and other places had incorporated these as well, but we're still seeing these things happen. This was just last couple of weeks ago, and that's kind of moving forward with what they're seeing in their neighborhoods and what people are asking for. So, and that's a lower cost way of doing things, of course. So then, but also with elections last week, there were several initiatives on ballots across the country, and one of the most impressive ones was this one here in Austin, where you had this widespread support of this ballot Proposition B to fund active transportation in their community. They were seeing substantial increases in biking and walking over the last several months. It was already an area that was encouraging that and promoting it and growing in biking, walking, but seeing the activity over the last few months, it's been even getting more support of it. And there were a lot of other ballot initiatives across the state that did pass, similar ones, maybe not to this extent, across the country that passed last week. There were no that did not as well, but you were seeing this interest and this kind of support and political support for these things as well. So, so what that kind of leads us to into our presentation, and it's kind of thinking, I guess, taking out and kind of thinking what the data is going to show you, what it means, and what opportunities you can get out of it, because I think some other places have already been pursuing that, and also how this maybe ties into certain other technologies out there with the popularity of e-bikes and micromobility, how that's supporting and how these are all supplementing these efforts, and they're all working together. I think kind of thinking of that as you hear the data and what opportunities it may present to you and your community and other organizations. So that's just a little kind of getting it into kind of background and getting into kind of why we're having these presenters here. And with that, these are the folks that what we'll do. First, we'll have NC State's Institute for Transportation Research Education. Blythe and Brendan will speak about some analysis they've been doing with a count program that we have in place. What we have with that is that DOT has worked with the NC State's ITRI folks for several years to do counts across the state, installing permanent bike and ped counters. And then over the last couple of years, recently, we started thinking about looking at, well, we're seeing a lot more people walking and biking. Let's do a little more in-depth analysis. So that's what they've done, and they're going to kind of present on that. Haynes Bunn with Strava Metro will kind of talk about some of their resources and what they're seeing in their data. They recently have been able to provide their data for free, and so we can kind of look at some of the things that are going on and trends that are going in North Carolina, and it's a data source that we can also use within our organization. And then Joe Michael with eBike Central runs a few local businesses and promoting e-bikes, and has a background in this and has an understanding of the growing interest in that and kind of the role it can play in active transportation in the state. So with that, I think I can pass it on to ITRI to kind of begin. I'll give an introduction, a bio, but if I guess we can pass the screen on over. So to Blythe, I believe.
Great. Can you see my screen? That's just the PowerPoint presentation.
I can. I'll give it a little. I'll get your bios first, and then you can get going, Blythe. Thanks.
Sounds great.
Yeah, and Blythe and Brendan both work at, like I said, NC State's Institute for Transportation Research and Education. Blythe is a research associate there. Her expertise is in bicycle and pedestrian volume data quality assurance and analysis, and she serves as the data analysis lead for the North Carolina non-motorized volume data program. She also contributes to a wide range of multimodal research projects. And Brendan Kearns is a research assistant also with ITRI. He serves as the data processing lead for the North Carolina non-motorized volume data program. His background includes work at multiple steps in the multimodal data collection process, including counts validation, quality control, and analysis. There you go, Blair.
Great. And y'all can hear me okay? Okay. So hi, my name is Blythe Carter Geiger, and I'm at the Institute for Transportation Research and Education at North Carolina State University. Our presentation today is going to be highlighting the impacts of COVID-19 on bicycling and walking in North Carolina, as observed by the North Carolina non-motorized volume data counting locations. The North Carolina Non-Motorized Volume Data Program was launched in 2013 to test a methodology for monitoring bicycling and pedestrian activity across the state. And its motto is what gets measured gets done, and if you're not counted, you don't count. And we've been really grateful to have such a long range of bicycle and pedestrian counts available to us in North Carolina. So the NCNMBDP began as a pilot project in November 2013 with the inclusion of NCDOT Division 7 and 9 in Phase 1. Continuous counters were installed to monitor bicycle and pedestrian traffic at 13 locations by December of 2014. These locations included sidewalks, shared use paths, bike lanes, and shared lanes. Bicycles are detected with an inductive loop that's permanently cut into pavement surfaces or buried under crushed gravel, and pedestrians are detected using a passive infrared sensor. These counting systems are manufactured by EcoCounter, and we use the EcoCounter multi-systems. And the program was expanded to NCDOT's Divisions 4, 5, 8, and 10 under Phase 2 with the installation of 31 additional counting locations by June of 2018. Continuous counters were installed on 4 additional locations on shared use paths under a separate NCDOT funded research project. So the map that's on screen provides the location and distribution of these continuous bicycle and pedestrian counters that are in the program as of August 2020. The green markers represent counters installed under Phase 1. The red markers represent counters installed under Phase 2, and the black markers are counters on the shared use paths that were purchased for a separate NCDOT funded project. With Entry's assistance, NCDOT is currently exploring a strategy to opt local agencies into the program for data management and reporting services for any counters that are purchased and installed outside of NCDOT. The purple markers on the map represent counters that were recently onboarded into our program under this approach. Those include 10 permanent counters in the capital area Greenway system in Raleigh, 3 permanent and 3 portable counters on the Greenways in Cary, 3 permanent counters on the Thermal Belt Rail Trail, and multiple portable counters that are deployed under the NC Department of Human and Health Services. So on March 10th, 2020, I think that we all remember, Governor Cooper declared a state of emergency in response to COVID-19. North Carolina's stay-at-home order took effect on Monday, March 30th until Monday, May 12th, when the state moved to a safer-at-home recommendation. Pedestrian and bicycle volumes were heavily impacted by this abrupt shift in work, school, and commerce. While I know many people are asking, is biking and walking up or down in North Carolina as a result of COVID-19? There really is no clear-cut answer. But what we do know is that changes in user volumes, the temporal patterns, and non-motorized facility demand have changed quickly and dramatically. And we're going to highlight some of our more interesting counting locations to show how these temporal changes and volume patterns have changed.
Changes in daily volume distributions indicate that more people are taking recreational trips, but less people are taking errands or commuting trips. Here, you can see representative daily volume graphs at Brevard Greenway above and Shelley Lake Trail below. We classified both as recreational routes. Brevard Greenway is a crosstown shared use path that connects downtown Brevard to a National Forest recreation area. Cycling demand for this path increased on both weekdays and weekends. Shelley Lake Trail in Raleigh is a paved shared use path that loops around Shelley Lake in a residential area. Pedestrian activity increased significantly on weekdays immediately after the COVID-19 state of emergency declarations, but not to the same degree on weekends. Pedestrian activity was already over 1,000 or 2,000 per day on weekends before 2020, so demand may have met a ceiling, especially considering the impact of social distancing on people's willingness to visit a crowded facility. Here we have daily volume graphs at Elizabeth Avenue and Cornwallis Road. both classified under commercial and commuting routes. Elizabeth Avenue in Charlotte is located in a restaurant district near a community college and a hospital, both major employment hubs. The top pair of charts show March pedestrian volumes, which decreased significantly as a result of COVID-19, especially on weekdays. Cornwallis Road is a 45-mile-an-hour arterial road with a wide bicycle lane connecting residential areas of Durham to Research Triangle Park, a major employment area. Most weekday bicycle trips in this facility were for commuting. While the daily bicycle traffic on weekdays decreased significantly, bicycle traffic on weekends did not change, indicating that this road is still used for recreational purposes. We also investigated the average distribution of volume within each day. Changes in hourly volume patterns indicate route users are making trips for different reasons than before COVID-19. And we've highlighted 3 examples of that shift in temporal patterns here. The top graph shows average volumes per hour at Ridge Road in Raleigh. Ridge Road has several transit connections, shopping centers, and schools located in a walkable residential area of the city. Weekday traffic patterns shifted from peaks near commuting times and school release times to later in the day, highlighting a likely increase in recreational use of the sidewalk. Pecan Avenue is located between a commercial restaurant and business area and a residential area in Charlotte. It saw little change in temporal patterns and volumes on weekdays, but a sharp increase and much higher peak in the middle of the day on weekends. At the bottom, Lewis, Stevens Drive and Cary is interesting because volumes on weekdays were higher and shifted towards the end of the day, but they were lower on weekends. This is likely because weekend traffic was the result of activities at the nearby recreation center, which limited programming as a result of COVID-19 restrictions. Each of these 3 trends reinforces that travel to destinations that were closed due to COVID-19 decreased, recreational use increased. One of the core questions we investigated was not only whether volumes had changed, but how much they were continuing to change over time. At many sites, the effects have decreased as individuals adjust to a new normal. Beaver Creek Greenway in Apex is representative of many of our recreational facilities. Volumes were much greater in the months immediately after the state of emergency and stay-at-home orders were declared. The difference in previous year's volumes and 2020 volumes decreased during the summer as the weather warmed and people adjusted to the pandemic, but increased again in September as the weather became milder. Lipa Cotton Greenway in Carborough is a major university cycling commuting corridor. It saw a sustained decrease in weekday volumes, but no change over time in weekend volumes. This indicates that the trip purposes of weekend users were likely less impacted by COVID-19 restrictions than those of weekday users. Duck Trail is an interesting counting location because it's in a seasonal vacation community. Variations in pedestrian volumes at this location were not particularly significant compared to previous years. However, volumes in September were higher than previous years, which suggests that the vacation season is extended further into the fall as more people are able to work remotely or as people shifted their vacation schedules from vacations in the summer.
So the answer to whether biking and walking has increased or decreased all over North Carolina is really that it has increased in certain areas and it has decreased in others. And so to think about how these trends might continue into the future, we wanted to use the most recent monthly data and just show the monthly average daily traffic in all of our counting locations that had valid data for this year's and previous years, just to see what the change has been. So this chart shows the monthly average daily pedestrian traffic figures that were calculated for every year of available data using the AASHTO AADT methodology. All MADT figures from 2019 and earlier were averaged to develop a pre-2020 figure. The percent increase or decrease in the average daily traffic is highlighted in the third column to the right, which is this one. These percent increases and decreases are further disaggregated by average weekday and average weekend daily traffic in the right 2 columns. So those are these 2 columns. You can see that overall pedestrian volumes continue to be much higher than previous years at certain stations and much lower than previous years at others. Stations that represent recreational off-street shared use paths have consistently higher daily volumes in September versus previous years, indicating that recreational walks and runs will continue to be significantly higher than previous years on these facilities. Stations that represent residential sidewalks continue to have consistently higher average daily traffic, indicating that people will continue to spend more time at home and will therefore be using these facilities that are near their homes more often. Stations that represent downtown business districts continue to have lower volumes, indicating that people are traveling to shopping, work, and dining destinations less frequently. The one exception to this trend is Salem Street in downtown Apex. Parking spaces were converted for temporary dining spaces to promote social distancing over the summer. And the activity near this counter may represent the same wait staff or other restaurant patrons that are walking past the same sensor, which may not mean there's necessarily more people visiting Salem Street, but it does show that activity is higher on this street than other streets that did not impose similar policies. University commuting corridor volumes have decreased since most students are either at home or studying remotely. It should be noted that Duke University students are still on campus as of fall 2020, and we can see that the average daily traffic at the Durham Main Street counting location has remained relatively unchanged. And finally, pedestrian volumes on facilities that are gateways to downtown areas have decreased significantly, which shows that these types of facilities have not experienced the same increase in demand for recreational trips as those that are closer to people's homes. For bicyclists, there are similar patterns. And so this chart shows all counting locations where bicycle sensors were functional for the month of September 2020. The magnitude of percent increases and decreases is actually much greater than the magnitude of percent increases or decreases for pedestrian traffic. You can see that on one facility, there's been a 200% increase in daily bicycle traffic, whereas on the lower range for a university corridor, that decrease was down by 78%. So like pedestrian activity, bicycle activity has increased on almost all shared use paths that are monitored in the program. This highlights the increased demand for safe recreational bicycling during periods of social distancing and remote work. Residential and suburban roadways that were used more for recreational reasons have seen an increase in bicycle activity, whereas bicycle activity on residential and suburban roadways that were used for commuting decreased. West End Boulevard in Winston-Salem is next to a large public park, and New Hope Church is near a popular shared use path access point. So those are the two areas that have increased in our sensor network. While Selwyn Avenue, which is a main bicycle corridor that connects Charlotte City Center to residential areas. People are still using Selwyn for recreational trips, since you can see that the weekend volumes have increased since recent years. You can see that there. Areas that are downtown or are traditionally used for commuting have seen decreases in volumes, with the exception of Walker Avenue in Greensboro. Walker Avenue is a low speed limit road and has seen an increase in users. And this shows that bicycle traffic on the street may be conducive to recreational bike rides and is less dependent on nearby university students. And finally, as universities shut down to students and staff, bicycle commuting by students and staff to those schools has decreased significantly. And again, this decrease is less pronounced near Duke University, which did not send their students home. So while this data shows us that the demand has increased on recreational paths and has shown us that temporal volumes have changed, there are some things that it can't show us. So we actually don't know who these people are who are using these facilities. We don't know the demographics, like the race or the income bracket, or even if these are new users or people who were using these facilities more and now have more time to use them more often. We don't know whether these trends will continue, and that will be very dependent on the future of remote work and how much time people are spending at home. But we do have a feeling that these increases and trends will continue. for the near future. These trends are also going to be impacted by how communities are currently investing in active transportation facilities right now. You can see that there is an increased demand for very safe off-street facilities. So the availability of these off-street facilities could determine how these trends continue in the future. Also, for our program, since we're a non-motorized traffic monitoring program, these changes in temporal patterns will affect non-motorized traffic monitoring practices. Many of these continuous count stations were set up to define factor groups, which define temporal patterns, but you can see that those temporal patterns have changed significantly. So I think that we're taking questions. Are we taking questions now or at the end of the presentation?
I think that will be both, if we have any now, or we'll be opening up the questions at the end as well.
Great.
I don't believe I'm seeing any in the chat box.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions about any of our charts or any of our findings, we can read them from the chat box.
I guess since we're seeing they're replacing, in some contexts, you're seeing less due to, the travel patterns that aren't the same now, or the populations that aren't located like at universities, et cetera. But in other locations, you're seeing larger increases on particularly trails. It could be, a person, the same person, just in a different location. So it's, I guess it's kind of hard to determine how much the increase may be. I guess overall, we are seeing an increase in numbers. We're just seeing it shifting the balance. So.
Right, and it should be noted that the volumes for recreational use are generally higher than the volumes for commuting uses. So those kind of higher recreational volumes have increased significantly.
Yeah, I think if the universities were able to open up in some extent at some point, and there was more work commute that occurred, then it'd be interesting to see, where those may pick up the bicycle and the pedestrian traffic as they were before to some extent, and what would happen with the more recreational and those other types of location at that time. So, yeah.
So there's one question in the chat box which says, was Chapel Hill included in the study? So we have one counter that's located in Chapel Hill on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. Unfortunately, we've been having issues with the sensors at that location, but we do have the Carborough. I'll go back to this. Here we go. So here's the bicycle chart again. We do have Carborough Lippincott Greenway, which is right on the Chapel Hill Carborough border and is one of the main bicycle commuting corridors in the town. And honestly, it's probably the most heavily trafficked bicycle commuting corridor in the state. And you can see here, Carborough Lippincott Greenway, pre-2020, the average daily traffic on that corridor was over 800 people in September, and this year the average daily traffic is down to about 400, which is still a lot of people. There's still a lot of people that are using that facility. It's just significantly less than previous years.
Okay.
Great.
I'm not seeing anything right now, so we'll just move on, and feel free to ask some questions when we conclude the other two presentations.
Thank you.
Thanks, Blythe and Brennan.
Thanks.
Okay. Haynes Bunn with Strava Metro will be our presenter now. Haynes joined Strava in March of 2016 and helps partners utilize Strava Metro data to analyze active transportation and improve bike and pedestrian infrastructure. She holds a bachelor's degree in GIS from the University of Southern California and became an avid bike commuter during her time working at a nonprofit in Washington, D.C. She is based out of Strava's Hanover, New Hampshire office, and her favorite activities include running, cycling, spending time with her husband, Rob, and hiking with their dog, Raleigh. So we'll pass it on to you, Haynes.
Great, thank you so much. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Great, so I'm Haynes. I am the Senior Customer Success GIS Engineer with the Strava Metro team. I'm really excited to be talking with you all today. Even though I now live in New Hampshire, I grew up in North Carolina. I grew up in Raleigh. So really excited to be talking with everyone today. I want to give a brief overview of Strava in case there are folks in the room who might not know what Strava is, just to give a bit of background about the Strava Metro dataset. So Strava is an app on your phone where you can record activities if you're going for a bike ride or a walk or a run or a hike, recording it with your phone or with a connected device such as a watch. And you have friends on Strava, like on other social media, and are able to keep track of your statistics and see your friends' activities. And it's a way to keep up with a record of your activities that you've been doing. We have over 70 million members worldwide that have contributed over 4 billion activities to Strava. To put that in a little bit of perspective, it took 8 years to get to the first billion activities, 18 months to get to the second, 8 months to get to the third billion, and then a few months to get to the fourth billion. So we have this incredibly rich data set about where folks are biking, how they're getting from point A to point B. And this was a way, the Strava Metro data set is aggregated and de-identified and is a way to provide insights to folks who are making those infrastructure decisions, city planners, engineers, folks who are making those decisions about bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. So we have created this data set out of the public activities on Strava and partner with DOTs and city planners, MPOs, to help them make active transportation accessible, efficient, and safe for everyone. As we announced at the end of September, access to the Strava Metro dataset is now free. So that's free for DOTs and for those MPOs, city planners, safe infrastructure advocates. It was something that we wanted to be able to provide that impact. And a way of being able to do that is providing it for free to those groups who are able to make use of it in the projects that they're working on. So that's a bit of a background on Strava and Strava Metro. I'm going to leave the presentation and go into a demo of the Strava Metro dashboard. We'll first look at North Carolina, and then we'll look a little more closely at Wake County and at Raleigh. So very similar to the same trends that Blythe and Brendan were seeing from their research with ITRI, where we're seeing, activities this year are up. So we're right now looking at the total number of bicycle trips in 2020 versus 2019. We've already had significantly more activities in North Carolina in 2020 than the previous year. And we're seeing a similar thing where the leisure activities had quite a bit of an increase, starting in March and April, and similar to the ITRI findings as well, where commutes were down as folks were more likely to work from home. So we have this dashboard where folks can look at the number of trips, the number of people who are completing those bicycle trips in a given area. I'm going to switch over here to the Wake County one, so we can dive a little more into Wake County as well. So some similar trends here, where if we look at a couple of past years worth of data, we can see that 2020 definitely has a very different trend from what we were seeing in terms of bicycle trips in previous years. And similarly, the commutes for 2020, I'll take out some of these older years here. Additionally, in Wake County, commutes again also lower as more folks are staying home. I'll now jump over to the map page where we have the ability to show some additional insights to, and I'll zoom in here on Raleigh. one thing that we have in here is the ability to identify popular corridors. And so this is, we can change the corridor length and start to find areas where people are biking and start to find some more trends about, you know, where they're biking and the time of day that those activities are occurring. So this lets people start to see, you know, when are these most likely to be used, what day of the week, what hour of the day, and start to identify some popular areas for biking in the city. We also have routes, which lets you see how people get from point A to point B. I found this really interesting, where if I set the destination here in downtown Raleigh, and we can move this around to see how do folks from different parts of the city, how would they get to downtown Raleigh? In blue, we're looking at the most direct route based on the shortest distance on OpenStreetMap routing. And in orange, we're looking at the most popular route based on usage on Strava. So this lets you start to see where folks are maybe following the safer infrastructure, or if they're avoiding other obstacles. So you can see where the popular and the direct route diverge. And we can move this around to start to see in different areas of the city, how would people get from, you know, maybe from where they live to where they work in downtown, and sort of move this around to see how folks get around the city. And then last, we have the ability to show streets. I have this open in another tab here, looking at some specifics for different streets or trails. So I've pulled up the House Creek Trail here, sort of that connector between the Shelley Lake Trail and the Museum of Art, and looking at, you know, how many activities were happening on this trail in 2019 versus 2020. Right now, I have this up here for 2019, where there were about 765 trips. And we have a breakdown of commutes and leisure, as well as a breakdown of some demographics about the people who did those activities as well. But if I change this to 2020, we'll see how this has really changed. This will recalculate here to show the numbers for 2020 that were up over 1,200 activities for September of 2020 on this trail. So the functionality in here lets you sort of move around and find 5 different areas where you're interested in getting some statistics about it. So if we come over here to the Museum of Art, we can start to see, you know, how does this compare in 2020 to 2019 and in older years as well. We'll let this recalculate here. So we're up to, you know, 1,000 activities in 2020, and we can compare this to 2019 and see what this looks like as well. And we can do this by different months. So it's a really great tool to really be able to dig into the streets, and it's a really great complementary data set with bike counters, and using those 2 data sets together to do some correlations, so that, you know, understanding that these are the counts of people who log their activities on Strava. So using that in correlation with the bicycle counter data to get a sense of the total cycling population as well. That's the end of my presentation, but I'm happy to take any questions or take a look at if there are any streets or specific areas that folks are interested in looking at. Happy to do that as well.
Okay, thanks, Haynes. Yeah, so Haynes did mention about supplementing some of this types of data with other types of count data, and that's actually what we are doing at DOT with one of our research projects with NC State and also East Carolina to look at analyzing some Strava data with and comparing it to data that we're getting from our permanent count equipment, and trying to combine those data sources for our needs. So that should wrap up this June, but hopefully we have some type of model where we can use this type of data and supplement it with our count data too. So, but it's taking some of the technologies out there and building off of it. We had a few questions from earlier session that I think we'll just get to at the end. They popped in toward the end, and I think I may have overlooked it too. So I apologize for that, but hopefully those folks can stay on, and we'll have Blythe and Brendan address those. But does anyone have any questions for Haynes? Either in you can speak up or put it in the chat box, or you can wait till the end. And Blair, if I'm missing something, let me know. So, oh wait, here I see. There's a question for Haynes. When we look at heat maps for Strava data, it was noted in some area dark gaps in fragile communities utilizing active transportation without the Strava platform. How do we ensure the data represents equitable needs?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start off by saying that Strava has, as a company, committed to becoming an anti-racist organization. That's something that the company and employees are committed to. And that's something that we absolutely want to acknowledge, that there are some places where Strava isn't used as much as in other places. And there definitely, there's a lot of factors that go into that. Is it that are Strava users more likely to be white and less likely to be Black, Indigenous, people of color? Are BIPOC athletes more likely to mark their activities as private? Private activities are not included in the Metro data set. Is there a lack of infrastructure in historically Black or neighborhoods for people of color? Is there a difference of infrastructure? There are a lot of things at play there, and it's something that we absolutely want to address. And absolutely want to work towards, how do we make sure that everyone feels safe being on Strava and logging their activities and being a part of the Strava Metro data set. And it's definitely something, that's something that we are talking with a lot of groups. And if you have feedback about any of that, I definitely welcome that and welcome the dialogue about that as well.
Okay. I have a few more. We'll see what we can get to before we need to move on. How does Strava get its data? How do they know what routes people are taking?
Yeah, so Strava is an app where you track your activities, either using the app on your phone or using a GPS watch. So it's actively tracked. So there's no passive tracking. It's only actively tracked, where people start an activity and end an activity, and it sort of maps the path that they take along the way. Okay.
Another one, how does the Strava analysis account for an increased number of app users?
That's a great question. And that's a lot of where the correlation with bicycle counters comes in. So if we can go back to the dashboard page, we can definitely see, year over year, there is, typical growth, but then in 2020, the growth doesn't look typical. And that's something that we can correlate with the bicycle counters and get, you can see what percentage of people who passed by a bicycle counter were also on Strava, and use that to essentially multiply the Metro data set by those expansion factors. So that's the best way to address, Strava growth versus new cyclists in an area.
Mm-hmm. We'll have another one, maybe it's kind of long. Are the commute and leisure trips self-reported? One of the challenges I've experienced with using Strava data is that it is weighted towards recreational trips, which is not always helpful as cities address transportations and measures of effectiveness and goals. Any insight you can share here would be helpful. I know some have developed factors.
Yes, that's a great question. So the commute data is, there's two different ways to be counted in the commute data. One is self-reported in the app. A Strava user can mark an activity as being a commute. And the second way is we're able to detect commutes based on similar characteristics to the activities that are tagged as a commute, essentially using those as a validation data set. So there are some other characteristics that we look for in activities that aren't tagged as a commute to see if they are in fact a commute. So we look at a couple of different factors. We look at if the activity is point to point, and if it is under a certain distance threshold, And if it is not tagged as a race or a workout, those are some additional tags that are available in Strava. And we also look at the route circuity as well, assuming that commutes are more likely to be less circuitous. So we look at a couple of different factors in there to include both of those things in the data set. So it's partially self-reported and then partially detected.
Okay, one more question and then we'll have to move on. I'm going to combine two, I guess. So the first is, can the Strava data be exported or downloaded? And the other question is, can the Strava metro data be exported into a common used GIS data file, shapefile, et cetera?
Yes, so on the map page, there's the ability to download data. There'll be two files. One is the shapefile, which we have pulled data from OpenStreetMap, and then there's also a CSV where you can set the time range, and then you can join the CSV with the shapefile.
Okay, thank you. There's a few more, but we can try to get to those after the next presentation. So Haynes, if you can stick around a little longer.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, thank you. We can move on to Joe Michael now. Okay, Joe Michael with eBike Central. Joe is the founder and president of eBike Central with a focus on pedal assist electric bicycles. He leads with a reputable, storied, and historic range of e-bike brands. He has a background in technology, marketing, and communications. He's applying his knowledge and experience to being these transformative products to the Southeast and the rest of the country. He has a goal for the company to be advocates for all types of cycling by supporting greenway, trail, and bike lane development. So off to you, Joe.
I don't know if you see my video now, do you, John?
I see a white screen.
Let's see if I can.
Let's see your slides now.
Okay, let me see if I can turn my video on quickly. I'm trying to add permission to my camera, but I'm wondering if I don't just go ahead.
Yeah, if it's okay if you can't show your video.
Okay. Well, let me just proceed forward, and then if I can get it turned on afterwards, I'll do that.
Okay.
So as long as you can see my slides, that's great. So yes, my name is Joe. I am the owner of a retail outfit selling electric bicycles, and so it'll be a little bit different perspective, but very exciting to hear all the data that we have on cycling. And so here on the home slide, you can see just a variety of e-bikes that are available.
Joe, I just see a white screen.
How's that better?
I see it, yeah.
Okay. Well, let me proceed this way if everybody can see the slides here. Apologize for that. Anyway, so eBike Central is an exclusive electric bike dealer. We have locations in Charlotte and Greensboro, and our market's been primarily the Southeast. And I'll speak a little bit today mainly about what electric bikes are, their usage, and do have some information related to how they're being used in general. They basically do have electric motors on them, and they provide a variable pedal assistance with a 30 to 50 mile range. They've basically been developed in Europe and Asia, and they've been trending in North America for probably the last 10 years. They do represent a new mode of transportation, and when they are utilized for things like errands and commuting, they do represent a way to improve efficiency around cities and reduce car usage. They do enhance the role of the bicycle in general. because it transforms what a bicycle could be used for past recreational and health use into errands and commuting. And they are increasingly becoming part of a transportation network in a city as well as a trail system. It does allow new categories of riders to participate in bicycling. We've definitely sold bicycles to e-bikes to physical limitations. Older adults have been a big demographic. And then people that have a challenge getting around cities, especially with something like hills, where it's just harder to ride around. And you can certainly go longer distances with e-bikes as well. In terms of laws, e-bikes are classified under federal law with 3 classes. Each of the classes does provide for pedal assistance up to either 20 or 28, where they're legally cutting off from assisting. A class 2 specifically has a throttle option on the bike that you can use and actually not pedal the bike. And we have had people that have limitations in pedaling, and that's actually been a benefit to them. They are all limited to 1 horsepower or the equivalent of 750 watts. So they are very much categorized below things like motorcycles or mopeds. You know, in terms of where to ride, they are treated as a bicycle and not a motorized vehicle. So streets, greenways, and off-road trails with limitations is where they're showing up. You know, recently in the last year or so, national parks have recognized e-bikes as the equivalent to bicycles, so they can be ridden in designated areas in the national park system. In terms of e-bike categories, we see 4 primary ones. One of them is a compact bike, typically with 20-inch wheels. They also have folding models available, which makes it easier to transport the bike, put it in trunks, put it in trains, and even in buses or within your office or home where you don't have to store the bike outside. It makes it easier for that. The urban city models are probably the most popular that we sell and are sold because they are the most general purpose with racks, fenders, lights available. And when you put bags and baskets on these bikes, it transforms them past just recreation use into either errand running or commuting. And then the off-road category covers primarily mountain bikes, where they take the form of what traditional mountain bikes look like with the added pedal assist option. Then we get into a pretty fast growing and trending area of e-bikes, which is cargo and utility. These 2 models I'm showing here are, you know, a front loading sort of Dutch style bike or an elongated rack on the rear of another bike. Each of those bikes carry over 400 pounds, something that's not able to be done with a traditional bike. And then we sort of get into a little bit of usage with e-bikes. So pre-COVID, there was a study done by the National Institute for Transportation and Communities, and they did interview about 1,800 respondents and had some findings, which are the following. So it did pedal assist reduces the riding effort with e-bikes, and that allows for additional people to actually get out and ride. And so health, fitness, and recreation was a big category related to e-bikes. Then, you know, people also tick the boxes for replacing car trips for errands and making commuting easier on bikes. You know, then some other comments were, you know, carrying cargo, transporting children, or just getting families out riding, as well as something we call the great equalizer, which is how pedal assist options allow different capable riders to ride together, either as friends or even couples. Then people on e-bikes generally feel safer riding. A lot of that has to do with something that relates to the weight of an e-bike. that we're not trying to relieve weight on a bike to make it, lighter and easier to ride. A lot of times there's bigger and heavier components in a way that you feel more planted on the ground when you're riding an e-bike. E-bikes with the pedal assist allow you to take longer routes, so you can utilize lower volume or more comfortable streets without having to, get onto busier, more point A to point B type routes. E-bikes do maintain higher speeds, so your average speed over your ride is higher, and it can help, eliminate that difference, a more dramatic difference when you're riding alongside traffic. We like to say you focus more on the ride than on riding, where you're having to worry about how hard it is to pedal or what gear you're in. E-bikes allow for a more focus on where you are and where you're riding to. Part of the study also uncovered some information related to trip types and different modes of transportation. And the third bar here shows across the graph here different types of trips: commuting, errands, family visits, entertainment, exercise and recreation, and how high the e-bike usage was across the board, really. Related to that graph was another one where it basically, they interviewed the respondents for the 3 most recent e-bike trips and what were those trips for. And recreation and exercise, becomes the highest. I think also related to getting more people out riding in general. But then commuting and errand running are noticeable as well in that study. Sort of switching gears a little bit and getting into more of general bicycle usage, and this does relate to the pandemic effect. So we do work pretty closely with People for Bikes, and they have an ongoing project where they're just extending research that they've done over time. And these next 2 slides will show bicycle usage, 2020 versus 2019. On the left graph here, it does show bike trips taking place in urban areas. And, one of the things to notice on these graphs I'll show is just the percentage increase. There are different measurements here. So on the left, it does show with sort of the red, moving 4-week average, the increase in urban area riding, which is substantial. Then you look on the right side where this is a rails to trail measurement, where they have 14 specific counters across rails to trails in the US, and you can see how much that has increased and really sustained. Both of those show the sustaining, uptick in riding. Next, couple more here, where this left side shows anyone ages 6 years or older participating in recreational bicycling, and the increase compared to 2019, during this year. And then on the right side is another mobile app, Ride Spot, that allows people to enter and monitor where they've been riding. And this shows the change in the number of bike rides and bike riders, over the course of the year. So consistently across all these different measurements, with People for Bike showing, pretty dramatic increase during this particular year. And it doesn't look like, for the most part, it's going to slow down in the near future. So in terms of e-bike share programs, something that we've paid attention to and we actually welcome, because it just creates more awareness related to the product. So, I think overall e-bike share programs have had some mixed results. I kind of call it part of a bigger science project, because, for several years ago, they just simply didn't exist at all. And I think the companies introducing the programs have been trying to find the optimum setting for introducing the share programs. What are the products they're introducing? You know, is it you leave them anywhere? Do you have to return them to docks? You know, non-e-bikes as well as e-bikes, and so I think it's a really more of a constant improvement approach that these bike share programs are taking right now. You know, scooters and bike share programs, you know, thrive in dense urban population areas. You know, our Charlotte store is located in the south end of Charlotte, and it's extremely dense with, you know, residents down there. And I think due to parking challenges and the cost of car ownership, it really drives people to find an alternate way to move around. I do think that the you know, first and last mile solution to incorporating things like public transportation is a solution. So multimodal transportation options, you know, support each other in this setting. You know, riders also enjoy riding with other people. So we oftentimes see, you know, more than one bike being used, usually with 2 or more people, you know, either riding together or groups of people riding. And I think that's part of the share program, just getting out for the experience. You know, e-bike share programs also build awareness and support product ownership. So buying an e-bike, we've had people test share programs and use them and then want to own a bike. And so we see that happening more and more, you know, in terms of helping build advocacy for safer places to ride. And then it can affect policy changes as well. And then the picture here just shows the Joy Rides program that was reintroduced into Charlotte in really just the last, you know, couple months. It was exciting to see that kind of come back into play down there. So, you know, in terms of infrastructure related to e-bikes and how people move around with those products, all these 3 pictures over here show Charlotte area. So greenways, you know, there's major projects happening in all sorts of larger cities. The Shared Streets Initiative, where major cities, you know, during COVID and some a little bit before, but primarily for COVID, were testing and adopting a shared streets approach that limited traffic in certain neighborhoods. Protected bike lanes. Larger cities see benefits to committing, you know, the valuable street space to that. And the one picture over here just shows a 2-way bike lane leading into uptown Charlotte. We've seen more combined bus and bike lanes being created, and Charlotte's also been doing some of this as well, where no car traffic can go into those lanes. So that's limited to buses and bicycles. And then finally, trail access, just the, you know, really pure recreational aspect of off-road or e-mountain biking, you know, are allowed on certain trails, but certainly more are needed over time. You know, in terms of Department of Transportation, and a little bit of information on, you know, how things have been going and how things could be improved. You know, there has been a statewide pedestrian and bicycle plan that was passed in 2013. You know, the goals were to improve, you know, that's mobility, safety, health, and economy and environment. And, you know, it's for the most part been left unfunded at the state level. There's been restrictions to utilizing federal money, which can be limited for these projects. And then it really then goes back to the local municipalities to fund this at really an unequal rate. So there's some inconsistencies, you know, across the board. NCDOT funded projects have been vastly limited since that date. And I did include a link here to a map that's been produced to show, you know, projects that have been completed and some gaps in that as well. So there's an overall interconnectedness of all these facilities that seems to be an opportunity ongoing to improve, you know, bicycling in North Carolina in general. You know, in terms of developing infrastructure, Again, it's been left to more local organization to plan, design, and build in the absence of some of the state level funding. Improvements currently seem to be more incremental, inconsistent, and not as substantial as a lot of people in the cycling segment really would like to see. And I think there's benefits to, all cities and certainly major ones too, focusing on this. NC has left the integration as an unfunded mandate as part of the state level. And then, a couple comments that I've received just through some sources in terms of the NC has the second largest roadway network in the nation, but only ranks 22nd for cycling. So this relates to, paths and opportunities alongside the roadway that are safer and has some right-of-way opportunities to, build in greenways and paths. And then in terms of e-bike trends, e-bikes and other personal mobility technologies like scooters are creating a more diverse transportation profile. It wasn't too many years ago that we didn't see the share programs and the scooters and different types of products simply moving around in the city. But we're seeing that more and more, and that doesn't seem to be slowing. E-bikes growing popularity in cities require greater focus on support because they are able to, in some settings, remove cars off the street and be used for transportation purposes. There's an increasing older and younger residents are finding ways to not use a car. And, the statement of sort of live, learn, and earn without driving a car in a city is present. And then residents, are attracted to cities that support a healthy living and lifestyle. And so cities wanting to attract populations or maintain populations of residents need to be focused on this healthy living approach. And, a big statement is that ridership would grow dramatically with safer riding. So creating the greenways, the protected lanes, and providing an infrastructure for bicycles and e-bikes to move around would definitely increase ridership. We hear that from customers in our stores. And just sort of a final slide here is to, North Carolina can innovate with state funding and renewing the plan, really to support more connected greenways, more protected bike lanes, more off-road trail access, and certainly more education. We definitely truly believe ridership will significantly increase when it is safer to ride and not compete with cars. So at that point, that's just the end of the presentation that I had today.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
You're welcome. Sorry for the technical issues.
No, it's fine. We saw it clearly. So, is there any questions for Joe? So I guess who are you within your business? What your clientele that you are generally seeing that's purchasing or utilizing e-bikes?
That's a great question. So the early adopter in the whole country was the baby boomer segment, which continues to be a big segment 55 to 70-year-olds, because they want to continue cycling, but they don't want to or can't in some settings ride a traditional bike. But that's grown dramatically past that into recreational use of e-bikes for younger riders. So we do see a mix. We also see families buying e-bikes to, ride together or use bikes as a utility to move children or go errand running, grocery shopping, things like that. Electric mountain bikes have been a focus in the last few years. And so trail access has been important to those riders, and it's big on the West Coast and sort of central US, and it's making its way to the Southeast. But we do see a broad range of probably late 20s to 70-year-olds is the primary market for the e-bikes.
Okay. So, oh, here we go. Has pricing increased or decreased during the last 6 months?
That's a great question. There's been, I kind of call it a gold rush. There's literally up to 300 manufacturers of e-bikes selling products in the United States at this point. You know, a lot of these products did come from Europe, and European brands that produce probably the highest quality products are thriving in the US, but there's a lot of Kickstarter companies and Indiegogo companies trying to come to market with products because they know it's going to be a high growth rate. You know, the overall range of e-bikes could be $1,000 up to $10,000. The industry average is around $2,700 for an e-bike. So the higher quality products aren't really adjusting their price, they're just improving their products. But there is sort of a race to a lower cost e-bike. The problem with that is there typically are more issues or problems with those products over time, and the warranties are shorter. So you see a lot of breaking down of e-bikes that are in the lower cost segments.
Okay. I'm reading the question. This is a question in general. What is the emerging thinking of the appropriateness of e-bikes on greenways?
So I think that there's been a pretty wide acceptance with e-bikes on greenways in general, keeping in mind that sort of legal, proper e-bikes were always to ride right alongside traditional bicycles. So there are limitations in speeds that they can go and how they can be used. So they weren't ever intended to be used outside of a traditional bicycle infrastructure. And so currently there's few limitations on riding on a greenway. The other thing to keep in mind is the growing e-bike segment helps advocacy for bicycle access in general. So for us, we've been welcomed into trying to help advocate for safer cycling access in general.
Yeah, and I think also I think you may have mentioned it, Joe, but the federal lands access was recently, I believe, passed where e-bikes are permitted there. Correct?
That's correct. And it's left up to the individual national park managers to implement where they can be ridden in each park.
Okay. Here's another question. How are driver expectancy issues being addressed? People not driving, for example, people driving not expecting their bicycles to be going 20+ miles per hour.
Well, I think overall we've seen traditional bicyclists, especially road bikers, ride faster than e-bikes. So it isn't something that it should always be the stereotype that e-bikes are going to be the fastest bicycles on the road. And so the limitations are that most people buy a class 1 e-bike, which is 20 miles an hour or less in terms of assistance. So again, they're designed and engineered to ride alongside traditional bicycles and ride like a traditional bicycle. But in terms of feeling safer, there is that part of it where you feel safer riding alongside traffic when you have to, participating on roads with cars, that you're able to maintain a speed that's not so dramatically different.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. I'm going to open up to all the questions now. I'm going to first go back to some that were earlier that I think came in later, overlooked. And I think this is to Blythe and Brendan with ITRI. I'm going to pose this question to you. Do you have pedestrian encounters in low-income communities where walkers, bikers are more likely to be out of necessity? Many of these sites seem to be in affluent regions where the counter sites were located.
So I'm hesitating because I'm thinking, you know, of what defines a low-income community, and what would define an affluent community in this context. So a lot of our counters are on shared use paths. A lot of them are in major cities. There are some that are in smaller communities, like Wilkesboro, closer to the mountains, on the Yadkin River Greenway, and there's been increases there. There's multiple counters on shared use paths throughout Raleigh, some, especially those that are owned by the Raleigh Parks and Rec Department. And some of those shared use paths could be considered in low income areas of Raleigh. And another smaller community. I mean, I just want to say smaller community versus a low income community. So I'm acknowledging that this isn't necessarily a low income community. Is in Sanford on a shared use path there, as opposed to a larger city. So these are the continuous counters, which were meant to define the factor groups, the temporal patterns. And then in the future, bringing in short duration counts on different areas could be considered, and that could reach into some more of those areas that are considered low income. So the answer is yes and no. There's a lot of these that are in more affluent areas, and there are some that are in less affluent areas. But it's something to consider in the future of whether these counters truly define those temporal patterns in all parts of the state, or just in certain demographic areas.
Yeah, and there were more counters locations that were then identified in this presentation, and we can follow up if people want to check in on some of those other locations. Another question to Blythe and Brendan. I know you looked at the frequency counts at locations for downtown areas, et cetera. But is it possible that more people are running errands, but just not during the trip chain commute hours? For example, I'm visiting the store less frequently, but I'm going during midday and walking when I would have normally driven after work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna. I don't want to say that's not a possibility. We're not interviewing these people saying why are you out walking? You know, would you originally take this trip earlier, or are you taking it in the middle of the day now? So that is a possibility. It's just for our assumptions, when we've seen that the temporal pattern over the day is that trips, you know, primarily happen in the early morning, and in the afternoon around 5, we've assumed those are kind of those commuting or commercial trips. And when they start happening a lot in the middle of the day, we've assumed that those are recreational trips. But there is some truth that some people could just be kind of spreading the demand for when they visit stores to try to go to those stores when there's a lot less people. But given that, we have a counter in Cameron Village in Raleigh, which is a shopping center. And those volumes, those pedestrian volumes on that shopping center sidewalk have been pretty consistently lower. So it could be happening that people are changing when they go to the store, but I think overall the volumes there's still less people going every day.
Okay, and I have another one for you too. How do you determine overall numbers when usage may occur in other non-traditional recreational commuter travel? So travel on Selwyn may be different. It's similar to other question. Travel on Selwyn may be different in that other routes may be more safe and for recreation and commuting.
Yeah, I think that's a really good note. So we said that, you know, bicycling and walking are up in certain areas and they're low in others. And I think really what the places where bicycling and walking are a lot higher just show that people are really drawn to those what they consider safer off-street facilities for their trip purposes currently. And that they're drawn to places that are closer to their home. So another one of those facilities that connects kind of residential areas to downtown Charlotte is Blue Line Trail, which is an off-street trail that goes along the rail corridor in Charlotte. And, volumes for pedestrians and bicyclists are up by a lot. So maybe somebody who would have used Selwyn feels safer on the Blue Line Trail. And so, the demand shift to that other off-street trail versus an on-street bike lane. So that definitely can happen in certain areas.
Okay, there was a question, this is just asking for a link from Strava. Craig is from Haynes. Can you provide a link to the publicly available Strava data?
Yeah, for sure. I can send it in the chat and we can make sure to send it around. It's metro.strava.com. And in there, folks can, there's a little application page and send that in and we review all of those. Yeah, that's the best way to get there. I'll send it through in the chat too.
And one more question. This will be the final one because we're approaching 11:30. Also to Haynes, have general data trends showed new routes being accessed during the pandemic or just higher use of established trends? Additionally, does Strava collect data regarding who is using the app in order to speak to the equity part?
Those are both great questions. And the first one, I would say it's some of both. And it really depends on the city and sort of what the city is doing to address sort of like the current demand for bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. There are a couple of places that we've looked at outside of North Carolina. We provided some data for a Bloomberg article, which we can also make sure to share a link for, where Los Angeles and Houston in particular had put in some slow street and shared streets initiatives and looking at the increase in activities in bicycle trips on those specific streets, from before and after those were implemented. So there's definitely sort of a mix of, depending on how different cities have addressed it and, whether they've opened up new bike lanes, new pedestrian infrastructure during the pandemic. The second question was about the data that we sort of like the demographics that we collect about Strava users. So we have their birthday, so we have age, and we have you can opt into different leaderboards based on gender. So that's how we have the gender data in there as well. So those are the two sets of demographic data that we have in the Metro View dashboard.
Okay. One other thing, getting back to the equity issue, we are doing some of that within DOT, looking at our programs and doing some evaluation of that programs across the board within our IMD division. And there will be some opportunity to look at our program with our count program to see how, if we are addressing all areas equitably at the state, if we are hitting those locations, fairly throughout the state. So we may be able to shift our program and to other focus areas to where it may be truly more needed. So I just wanted to throw that out there before we got off the call. But it's 11:30, and I think this will be, Blair's going to get this posted on our website, the slides, the recording, and the Q&As. And I want to thank all the presenters for taking their time out putting the slides together and presenting today. And I thank you for everyone who's kind of attending today as well. So thank you very much and have a good rest of your day.